My name is Jessica. I'm 29 years old. And when my bankruptcy attorney told me during my hearing that someone had charged $47,000 in wedding expenses to my credit cards, I thought there had been a mistake. The lawyer read off vendors I'd never heard of. Scottsdale Grand Resort, $12,000. Enchanted Gardens Florist, $3,500. Divine Wedding Photography, $4,200. As the pieces fell into place, one devastating truth emerged. My own sister Melissa had used my credit cards to fund her dream wedding while I was losing everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me that I discovered my sister's betrayal during what was supposed to be the lowest point of my financial life. There I sat in a sterile courthouse in Phoenix, Arizona, wearing my one good business suit that was starting to show wear at the elbows, listening to my attorney, Mr. Davidson, methodically list my debts to the bankruptcy judge. I had prepared myself for the humiliation of admitting financial failure at 29, but I hadn't prepared for the shock of learning that a significant portion of my debt wasn't even mine. Your Honor, Mr. Davidson continued, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the credit report, there appeared to be several charges on Ms. Rodriguez's accounts that she claims she didn't authorize. Wedding-related expenses totaling approximately $47,000 across 3 different credit cards. Judge Martinez, a stern woman in her 60s with salt and pepper fare, looked up from her papers. Ms. Rodriguez, are you saying these charges are fraudulent? I sat there frozen, my mouth dry as cotton. The truth was hitting me in waves. Melissa's wedding had just been 3 months ago. I had been invited, had even managed to scrape together money for a bridesmaid dress and a modest gift, despite my financial struggles. The wedding had been absolutely gorgeous, an elaborate affair at one of Scottsdale's most exclusive resorts, with flowers that looked like they belonged in a magazine, and photography that captured every perfect moment. At the time, I had wondered how Melissa and Tyler could afford such an extravagant celebration. Tyler worked as a junior marketing coordinator, and Melissa had been between jobs for most of their engagement, picking up occasional shifts at a boutique in Old Town Scottsdale. When I'd asked her about it, she had been vague, mentioning something about Tyler's family helping out and some savings they had accumulated. Ms. Rodriguez, Judge Martinez's voice brought me back to the present moment. Do you recognize these charges or not? I need to see the specific dates and vendors, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Davidson handed me a printed breakdown of the charges. As I scanned the list, my stomach dropped with each line item. The dates corresponded perfectly with Melissa's wedding timeline. The vendors were all ones she had excitedly told me about during her engagement. The Scottsdale Grand Resort, where she had her reception. Enchanted Gardens, the high-end florist she had insisted on despite the cost. Divine Wedding Photography, whose Instagram she had shown me dozens of times. The pattern became clear as I continued reading. The charges had started 8 months before the wedding and continued right up until 2 weeks before the ceremony. Dress alterations at an upscale bridal salon, makeup trial sessions, even charges for the bachelorette party weekend in Sedona that I couldn't afford to attend. What made it even more devastating was the realization of how carefully it had been done. The charges were spread across 3 different credit cards, none of them maxed out completely, which is probably why I hadn't noticed them sooner. Small amounts at first, $200 here, $500 there, building up to larger payments as the wedding approached. Someone who knew my spending habits well enough to know I rarely checked my statements in detail, especially during the chaos of my financial crisis. My mind raced back to the previous year. I had been struggling to keep up with my bills after my hours were cut at the marketing firm where I worked as a graphic designer. The company had been downsizing, and my position had been reduced to part-time with no benefits. I had been so focused on making rent and keeping my car payments current that I had admittedly been careless about monitoring my credit card statements. Melissa knew about my financial struggles. I had confided in her about my reduced hours, my stress about making ends meet, my fears about having to move back in with our parents. She had been sympathetic, offering to help however she could, even suggesting I move in with her and Tyler temporarily to save money. I had declined, too proud to admit how desperate my situation had become. Now I understood why her offer had seemed so generous. She could afford to be magnanimous when she was secretly using my credit to fund her fantasy wedding.
Your Honor, Mr. Davidson said, if these charges are indeed fraudulent, we'll need to file a separate police report and work with the credit card companies to dispute them. This could significantly change the scope of Ms. Rodriguez's actual debt. The judge nodded. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm going to continue this hearing for 2 weeks to allow you time to investigate these charges thoroughly. If they prove to be fraudulent, you'll need to provide police reports and any other relevant documentation. As the hearing concluded and I walked out of the courthouse into the blazing Arizona sun, my head was spinning. The temperature was already hitting 105 degrees at 10 a.m., but the heat felt insignificant compared to the burning rage building in my chest. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot, air conditioning blasting, staring at the credit card statement printouts. Each line item felt like a personal betrayal. Melissa hadn't just stolen money from me, she had stolen it during the most vulnerable period of my life when I was already drowning financially and emotionally. The wedding reception I had attended, smiling and congratulating my sister on her perfect day, had been paid for with my credit cards. The photographer who had captured her radiant smile as she danced with Tyler, I had unknowingly paid for those photos. The flowers that had made her bouquet so stunning, the cake that had been the centerpiece of the reception, even the champagne toast that had celebrated their love, all of it funded by my financial ruin. I thought about all the times during her engagement when I had felt guilty for not being able to contribute more to her celebrations, when I couldn't afford to go to her bridal shower because of the cost, when I had to skip her bachelorette weekend, when I could only manage a modest gift for the wedding itself. The whole time, she was using my own money to fund the very events I couldn't afford to fully participate in. The cruelest part was remembering how concerned she had seemed about my financial situation. She had listened to me stress about bills, had offered advice about budgeting, had even brought me care packages of groceries when she knew I was struggling, all while secretly charging thousands of dollars to my credit cards. As I drove home to my tiny studio apartment in downtown Phoenix, I tried to process the magnitude of what I had discovered. $47,000 wasn't just money. It represented years of my life, years of paying minimum payments, years of damaged credit, years of financial stress that I hadn't even caused myself. But more than the money, what hurt most was the realization that my sister, the person I had trusted most in the world, had deliberately and systematically betrayed that trust for her own benefit. She had watched me struggle, had listened to me worry about my future, and had continued charging wedding expenses to my accounts without a moment's hesitation. The sister who had been my maid of honor at my own small courthouse wedding 5 years earlier, who had helped me through my divorce, who had been my closest confidant and supporter, that same person had stolen from me during my darkest hour to fund her perfect day. I knew I had to confront her, but first I needed to understand the full scope of what she had done. I needed to gather evidence, document everything, and prepare for what I suspected would be the most difficult conversation of my life. Because this wasn't just about money or credit cards or wedding expenses. This was about the complete destruction of trust between sisters, and I wasn't sure our relationship would survive what came next.
To understand how devastating Melissa's betrayal truly was, you need to know our family history and the person I thought my sister was. Growing up in Tempe, Arizona, we were what you'd call a middle-class family struggling to stay middle class.
Our dad, Robert, worked as a supervisor at a manufacturing plant, and our mom, Carol, was a part-time school secretary. Money was always tight, but our parents made sure we never felt deprived. Melissa and I were only 18 months apart, and despite the small age gap, our personalities couldn't have been more different. I was the responsible older sister, the one who did homework without being asked, saved birthday money in a piggy bank, and helped mom with household chores. Melissa was the free spirit, the charmer who could talk her way out of trouble with a smile and a well-timed joke. Our parents divorced when I was 16 and Melissa was 15. Dad moved to Tucson for a job opportunity that he claimed would help him pay better child support, but the checks became increasingly sporadic before stopping altogether. Mom took on a second job at a retail store, working evenings and weekends to keep us afloat. During those difficult years, I stepped into a caretaker role almost naturally. I got a part-time job at a local coffee shop, helped Melissa with her homework, and managed much of the household responsibilities while Mom worked double shifts. I graduated with a 3.8 GPA and a partial scholarship to Arizona State University, where I studied graphic design while working 20 hours a week to cover my living expenses. Melissa, meanwhile, seemed to float through high school without much concern for the future. She was popular, beautiful, and had a natural charisma that drew people to her. She dated frequently, participated in drama club, and maintained decent grades without much effort. When it came time for college, she enrolled in community college, but dropped out after one semester, claiming she needed to find herself. What I didn't realize at the time was that our different approaches to responsibility were setting up a dynamic that would follow us into adulthood. I became the problem solver, the one who planned ahead and made sacrifices for long-term stability. Melissa became accustomed to having safety nets, to having someone else worry about the practical details while she focused on enjoying life. After college, I moved to downtown Phoenix and found steady work at a mid-sized marketing firm called Creative Solutions. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough for me to afford a small studio apartment and start building some financial independence. I was proud of my credit score, my savings account, and the sense of security I had worked so hard to achieve. Melissa's path was more chaotic. She moved back in with Mom after dropping out of college, worked a series of retail jobs, and cycled through several relationships. She was always starting new ventures, selling jewelry online, attempting to become a social media influencer, talking about going back to school for interior design. Each new plan would last a few months before she'd lose interest and move on to something else. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Despite our different lifestyles, Melissa and I remained close. I was the person she called when she needed advice, needed help with a resume, or needed someone to listen to her latest relationship drama. She was the person who brought spontaneity into my sometimes overly structured life, who convinced me to take weekend trips to Sedona or try new restaurants I would never have discovered on my own. Our relationship had always involved me helping her out financially in small ways. I'd cover dinner when we went out, knowing she was between jobs. I'd help with her car repairs when money was tight. I paid for her bridesmaid dress when our cousin Ashley got married, understanding that she couldn't afford it, but wanting her to be included. These weren't loans in any formal sense, they were what family did for each other. When Melissa met Tyler 3 years ago, I was genuinely happy for her. He seemed stable and kind with a steady job and realistic goals. They met at a mutual friend's birthday party, and their relationship progressed at a healthy pace. Tyler worked as a junior marketing coordinator at a different firm than mine, and while his salary wasn't impressive, he was ambitious and hardworking. For the first time in years, Melissa seemed settled. She found consistent work at an upscale boutique in Old Town Scottsdale, moved in with Tyler after 8 months of dating, and began talking about wanting to build a real future with someone. I was relieved to see her in a stable relationship with someone who seemed to bring out her more responsible side. When they got engaged 18 months ago, I was thrilled. The proposal was simple but sweet. Tyler took her hiking at Camelback Mountain during sunset and proposed with a modest but beautiful ring.
Melissa was over the moon, and for once her dreams seemed achievable and grounded in reality.
But as the wedding planning began, I started noticing changes in Melissa's behavior and expectations. What had initially been described as a small, intimate ceremony began growing in scope and cost. The guest list expanded from 50 people to over 150. The venue changed from a local community center to the prestigious Scottsdale Grand Resort. The budget conversations became increasingly vague and uncomfortable. When I expressed concern about the costs, Melissa would brush off my questions with vague reassurances. "Tyler's family is helping more than we expected," she'd say, or "We found some great deals through wedding vendor connections." She seemed so happy and confident about their financial plan that I didn't want to be the pessimistic sister raining on her parade. Meanwhile, my own financial situation was deteriorating. The marketing firm where I had worked for 4 years began experiencing budget cuts. First, they eliminated our annual bonuses. Then they cut our health insurance contributions. Finally, 6 months before Melissa's wedding, they reduced my position from full-time to part-time, cutting my salary by nearly 40%. I was devastated, but tried to keep the news private while I searched for another full-time position. The job market for graphic designers in Phoenix was competitive, and most opportunities paid significantly less than what I had been earning. I began falling behind on bills, relying more heavily on credit cards to cover basic expenses. The stress was overwhelming. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. worrying about rent, skip meals to save money, and spend hours each day applying for jobs that seemed increasingly out of reach. My savings account, which I had worked so hard to build, dwindled to nothing within 3 months. During this period, Melissa was my emotional support system. She'd bring me coffee during particularly stressful weeks, listen to me vent about job interviews that didn't pan out, and remind me that my situation was temporary. She seemed genuinely concerned about my well-being and offered to help however she could. "You know, you could move in with Tyler and me temporarily," she suggested one evening when I confided how close I was to missing rent. "We have space, and it might give you time to find something better." I declined, too proud to admit how desperate I was becoming, but I was touched by her offer. It seemed like proof that despite our different approaches to life, we still looked out for each other when it mattered most. How wrong I was about everything.
The engagement period should have been one of the happiest times in Melissa's life, and from the outside, it certainly appeared that way. She glowed with excitement every time she talked about wedding plans, spent hours showing me Pinterest boards filled with elegant centerpieces and flowing wedding dresses, and seemed to have an endless supply of energy for vendor meetings and venue tours. What I didn't realize was that her enthusiasm was being fueled by unlimited access to credit. My credit. The first red flag I should have noticed was how quickly her wedding vision expanded beyond anything Tyler's salary could realistically support. When they first got engaged, Melissa had talked about a budget-conscious celebration. "We're thinking maybe $15,000 total," she had told me over lunch at our favorite cafe in Old Town Scottsdale. "Something simple but elegant, you know? Tyler and I both want to start our marriage without debt." I had been impressed by their practical approach, especially knowing Tyler's entry-level marketing salary was probably around $45,000 a year, and Melissa's boutique work was part-time at best. A $15,000 wedding seemed ambitious but achievable with some family help and careful planning. But within 2 months, that budget had somehow tripled. Melissa began talking about vendors and venues that were clearly in a completely different price category. The Scottsdale Grand Resort, where she eventually held her reception, had package deals starting at $200 per person. With 150 guests, that alone would have consumed their entire original budget. When I gently questioned the escalating costs, Melissa always had explanations that seemed plausible on the surface. "Tyler's aunt offered to contribute more than we expected," she'd say, or "the venue gave us a huge discount because they had a cancellation." She spoke with such confidence about their financial arrangements that I began to wonder if I was being overly cautious or pessimistic. The vendor selection process was where the red flags really should have been obvious. Melissa chose the most expensive option for everything, not just slightly above budget, but the absolute premium tier of every service. Divine Wedding Photography, the photographer she selected, charged $4,200 for their basic package. I knew this because I had looked into wedding photographers when I got married 5 years earlier, and their prices had been out of my league even then. Their portfolio is just incredible, Melissa gushed, showing me images on her phone of ethereal bride portraits and perfectly lit reception shots. And they include an engagement session and a wedding album. It's actually a really good value when you break down everything that's included. The florist was another extravagance that should have raised questions. Enchanted Gardens was known throughout Scottsdale for creating elaborate arrangements for high-end weddings and corporate events. Their standard bridal package started at $3,500, and that was for relatively simple arrangements. Melissa's vision involved cascading orchids, custom centerpieces, and a bridal bouquet that looked like something from a royal wedding. I know it seems expensive, she admitted when I saw the florist's proposal, but flowers are so important for photos, and this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Tyler's family really wants us to have everything we dream of. Tyler's family became a convenient explanation for every expensive decision. According to Melissa, his parents were contributing significantly to the wedding costs. His successful older brother had offered to help, and there was even mention of a generous aunt who wanted to make their day special. I never met most of these allegedly generous family members, but Melissa's stories about their financial support were detailed and consistent. The dress shopping experience was particularly revealing in retrospect. Melissa insisted on going to the most upscale bridal salon in Scottsdale, a place where appointments were required and champagne was served while you browsed. I tagged along for moral support, expecting to help her find something beautiful within a reasonable budget. Instead, I watched her try on dresses that cost more than my monthly rent. The dress she ultimately chose was $2,800, not including alterations, shoes, and accessories. When the sales consultant mentioned the total cost with tax and alterations would be close to $3,500, I winced visibly. "It's perfect," Melissa said, twirling in front of the three-way mirror. "Don't you think it's perfect, Jess?" The dress was absolutely stunning, layers of silk and lace that made her look like a fairy tale princess. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. Even with generous family contributions, how were they affording these premium choices for every aspect of the wedding? "Are you sure about the budget?" I asked carefully as we left the salon. "I mean, it's beautiful, but that's a lot of money."
Melissa linked her arm through mine as we walked to our cars. "Jess, I love that you worry about me, but Tyler and I have been planning and saving for this for over a year. We've got it covered, I promise." The bachelorette party was another extravagant affair that I couldn't afford to fully participate in. Melissa planned a weekend in Sedona with spa treatments, wine tastings, and luxury accommodations at a resort that charged $400 per night. The per-person cost for the weekend was over $800. Not including transportation and meals. I had to bow out of most of the activities, claiming work obligations, but really unable to afford the expense. Melissa seemed disappointed, but understanding. "I wish you could join us for everything, but I totally get it," she said. "Maybe we can do a separate sister celebration that's more budget-friendly." Looking back, I realize now that my financial constraints during this period were actually benefiting Melissa's deception. Because I was struggling and often had to decline expensive activities, I wasn't around to witness the full scope of her spending or ask the kinds of detailed questions that might have revealed the truth. The wedding shower was another elaborate affair that exceeded anything I'd seen for friends' weddings. Held at an upscale restaurant in Phoenix with custom decorations, premium catering, and expensive favors for guests, it looked like something from a wedding magazine. The estimated cost had to be at least $3,000 for 50 guests. When I complimented Melissa on how beautiful everything looked, she beamed with pride.
Tyler's mom really went all out. She insisted on handling everything for the shower because she said I deserved to be pampered before the big day. Every explanation seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they painted a picture of financial generosity from Tyler's family that seemed almost too good to be true. I began wondering if I had misunderstood their family's financial situation, if perhaps Tyler came from more money than I had realized. The final month before the wedding was a whirlwind of last-minute details and escalating expenses. Hair and makeup trials, final dress fittings, rehearsal dinner planning, everything seemed to require additional costs that Melissa handled with surprising ease. She never seemed stressed about money, never mentioned having to make compromises or choose less expensive alternatives. "I can't believe how smoothly everything is coming together," she told me during our final bridesmaid dress fitting. "Tyler and I feel so blessed that we're able to have exactly the wedding we dreamed of." Standing there in the bridal shop, watching my sister glow with happiness about her perfect wedding, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. I was genuinely happy for her, proud that she had found love and stability with Tyler, but I also felt a nagging sense of unease about the financial aspects of their celebration, and guilt about my own money troubles preventing me from being as involved as I wanted to be. I pushed those concerns aside, telling myself that Melissa and Tyler were adults who could manage their own finances. If they said they had the wedding covered, who was I to question their planning? I focused on being the supportive sister, helping where I could, and preparing to celebrate their big day with genuine joy. If only I had known that my own credit cards were funding every detail of the wedding I was preparing to attend.
While Melissa was planning her dream wedding with seemingly unlimited resources, my own financial world was collapsing in slow motion. The reduction to part-time hours at Creative Solutions had been devastating enough, but what followed was a cascade of financial disasters that left me drowning in debt and scrambling just to survive. The first major blow came when my car broke down 3 weeks after my hours were cut. The transmission failed completely, leaving me stranded in a Walmart parking lot on a scorching August afternoon. The repair estimate was $3,200, more than I made in a month at my reduced salary. I had exactly $340 in my checking account and maybe $800 in savings that I'd been desperately trying to preserve for rent. I had no choice but to put the repair on my credit card, knowing it would take months to pay off, but needing transportation to get to work and job interviews. That single expense pushed my primary credit card close to its limit and marked the beginning of a debt spiral that seemed impossible to escape. 2 months later, my landlord informed all tenants in my building that rent would be increasing by 15% due to rising property taxes and maintenance costs. My $1,200 monthly rent would jump to $1,380 starting in January. For someone with a stable full-time job, it might have been manageable. For me, working part-time and already behind on bills, it felt like a death sentence. I spent weeks searching for cheaper apartments, but everything decent in Phoenix required first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit. Easily $3,000 up front that I simply didn't have. Moving back in with my mom was an option I considered, but her small 2-bedroom house in Tempe already felt cramped with just her in it, and I was 29 years old, too proud to admit I needed to move backwards in life. The job search was its own special form of torture. I applied to dozens of positions, from full-time graphic design roles to part-time administrative work to retail jobs that would at least provide consistent hours. The graphic design market in Phoenix was oversaturated, with experienced designers competing for entry-level salaries. Every interview seemed promising until they learned about my current part-time status or saw gaps in my recent work history. "We're looking for someone who can commit to growing with the company long-term," became a phrase I heard repeatedly. Code for, "We don't want someone who's obviously desperate and might leave the moment something better comes along." Meanwhile, basic living expenses continued to mount. My health insurance through Creative Solutions had been discontinued when I went part-time, leaving me to navigate the expensive world of individual coverage. The cheapest plan I could find still cost $280 per month with a $5,000 deductible, money I could barely afford but couldn't risk going without. Groceries became a careful calculation of calories per dollar. I lived on pasta, rice, eggs, and whatever vegetables were on sale. I canceled my gym membership, my streaming subscriptions, and even my phone's data plan, switching to a basic package that left me constantly searching for Wi-Fi hotspots. Every expense was scrutinized, every purchase delayed until absolutely necessary. Credit cards became my lifeline and my doom simultaneously. When I couldn't cover utilities, I charged them. When my car needed gas to get to job interviews, I charged it. When I had to buy interview clothes because my existing wardrobe was too casual, I charged those too. The minimum payments alone were eating up nearly half of my part-time income, creating a vicious cycle where I needed credit to survive but couldn't afford to pay down the debt. The worst part was the isolation. I stopped going out with friends because I couldn't afford to split dinner bills or buy drinks. I declined invitations to birthday parties, weekend trips, and social events that would have required spending money I didn't have. My social media became a carefully curated facade of occasional work updates and neutral observations, hiding the reality that I was barely holding my life together. Through all of this, Melissa remained one of my few sources of emotional support. She'd text me encouraging messages about job interviews, bring me coffee when she knew I was having particularly difficult weeks, and listen patiently when I needed to vent about the stress of financial insecurity. "You're so much stronger than you realize," she told me one evening when I broke down crying after another job rejection. "This is just a rough patch. You've always been the responsible one, the one who figures things out. You'll get through this." Her support meant everything to me during those dark months. When I felt like a complete failure, she reminded me of my accomplishments. When I worried that I'd never recover financially, she assured me that setbacks were temporary. She even offered practical help, like letting me use her address for job applications when I was worried about my apartment complex's reputation affecting my prospects.
"I hate seeing you struggle like this," she said during one of our sister coffee dates that she always insisted on paying for. "I wish I could do more to help. Once Tyler and I are settled after the wedding, maybe we can figure out something more substantial." By December, 6 months after my hours were cut, I was facing the inevitable. I was 3 months behind on rent, my credit cards were maxed out, and I had received a formal eviction notice. My car had been repossessed 2 weeks earlier when I couldn't make the payments, leaving me dependent on public transportation and Uber rides I couldn't afford. The final straw came when I ended up in the emergency room with what I thought was a heart attack but turned out to be a severe panic attack brought on by financial stress. The bill for that 4-hour hospital stay was $8,400, even after the uninsured discount. I stared at that bill and realized I had reached the point where my debt had become mathematically impossible to overcome with my current income. That's when I first Googled bankruptcy lawyer Phoenix and began researching what had once seemed like an unthinkable option. The stigma of bankruptcy felt devastating. Admitting failure, acknowledging that I couldn't manage my financial responsibilities, accepting that I needed legal protection from my own debts. I spent 2 weeks reading about Chapter 7 bankruptcy, learning about asset liquidation, credit score impacts, and the long-term consequences of wiping out debt through legal proceedings. The process seemed overwhelming and humiliating, but it also represented the only path I could see toward eventual financial recovery. Mr. Davidson's consultation fee was $200 that I had to borrow from my mom, another humiliation in a long series of them. But his explanation of the bankruptcy process gave me the first hope I'd felt in months. Most of my debt would be eliminated, giving me a chance to start over without the crushing weight of impossible payments. "You're not the first person to face this situation," he assured me.
Medical bills, job loss, unexpected expenses. These things happen to responsible people every day. Bankruptcy exists for exactly these circumstances. Filing the paperwork felt both defeat and relief. Defeat because it represented the complete collapse of the financial independence I'd worked so hard to achieve. Relief because it meant the constant phone calls from creditors would stop, the threats of garnished wages would end, and I could finally stop lying awake at 3 a.m. calculating payments I couldn't afford to make. I didn't tell Melissa about the bankruptcy filing. She was in the final weeks of wedding planning, glowing with happiness and excitement about her upcoming celebration. I couldn't bear to burden her with my financial catastrophe when she was experiencing one of the best periods of her life. Besides, I told myself, the bankruptcy would be over quickly, and I could rebuild from there. I had no idea that the hearing would reveal how my own sister had contributed to the very debt I was seeking to eliminate.
The morning of my bankruptcy hearing, I woke up before my alarm at 5:30 a.m., my stomach churning with anxiety and shame. I had barely slept, spending most of the night rehearsing answers to questions the judge might ask, and trying to prepare myself mentally for the humiliation of publicly admitting financial failure. I chose my outfit carefully, a navy blue business suit I'd bought for job interviews, the only professional clothing I owned that still fit properly and looked respectable. I wanted to appear responsible and remorseful, not like someone who had been careless with money or was trying to game the system. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was wearing clothes purchased with credit card debt to a hearing designed to eliminate that same debt. The Maricopa County Courthouse was an imposing concrete building downtown, and walking through the metal detectors with a folder full of financial documents felt like a perp walk. Other people in the waiting area looked just as nervous and defeated as I felt. We were all there for the same reason. Our financial lives had become unmanageable, and we needed legal intervention to survive. Mr. Davidson met me in the hallway 30 minutes before our scheduled hearing time. A kind man in his 50s with graying hair and tired eyes, he had handled hundreds of bankruptcy cases and had seen every type of financial disaster imaginable. His calm demeanor had been reassuring during our initial consultations, but today even he seemed more serious than usual. "Jessica, before we go in, I need to review something with you," he said, pulling out a manila folder thick with papers. "I received the final credit report from all three bureaus yesterday, and there are some charges on your accounts that don't match the spending patterns you described to me." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "Large payments to wedding vendors, luxury service providers, and high-end retailers in Scottsdale. The dates and amounts suggest someone was planning an expensive celebration. Since you told me you've been single for 2 years and struggling financially for over a year, these charges don't make sense." He handed me a printout of credit card statements I'd never seen in such detail. The itemized list was devastating, not just because of the amounts, but because I recognized every single vendor. Scottsdale Grand Resort, Enchanted Gardens Florist, Divine Wedding Photography, Elegant Occasions Catering. Each charge represented a piece of Melissa's dream wedding that I had unknowingly financed. "Oh my God," I whispered, scanning the dates. The charges had started 8 months before Melissa's wedding and continued right up until 2 weeks before the ceremony. They weren't random purchases or identity theft by a stranger. They were systematic, deliberate, and perfectly timed to Melissa's wedding planning timeline. "Do you recognize these vendors?" Mr. Davidson asked gently. "They're from my sister's wedding," I said, my voice barely audible. "She got married 3 months ago." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The expensive venue Melissa somehow could afford, the premium photographer whose rates were far beyond Tyler's salary, the elaborate floral arrangements that had made the ceremony look like something from a magazine. All of it paid for with my credit cards, while I was struggling to keep my electricity from being shut off. Judge Martinez called our case at exactly 9 a.m. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and tired. Judge Martinez was a stern woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, known for running an efficient courtroom and having little patience for incomplete documentation or evasive answers. Ms. Rodriguez, you're filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy with approximately $73,000 in total debt. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, I managed to say. Mr. Davidson, I see you've noted some irregularities in the credit card charges. Can you explain? Mr. Davidson stood and approached the bench with the credit reports. Your Honor, there appeared to be approximately $47,000 on Ms. Rodriguez's credit cards that she claims she didn't authorize. These charges are all related to wedding expenses, and they don't match her reported income or spending patterns. Judge Martinez frowned, putting on her reading glasses to examine the documents more closely. Ms. Rodriguez, are you claiming these charges are fraudulent? The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Saying yes would mean accusing Melissa of identity theft and fraud, serious felony charges that could destroy her life. Saying no would mean accepting responsibility for debt that would take decades to repay, debt that had been incurred while I was literally struggling to afford food. I started, then stopped. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the wooden table in front of me. I need to see the specific charges and dates, Your Honor.
The court clerk handed me the detailed printout. As I scanned each line item, the systematic nature of Melissa's deception became undeniable. The charges weren't random. They followed the logical progression of wedding planning. Early charges for venue deposits and vendor consultations, medium charges for dress fittings and photography sessions, large charges for final payments as the wedding approached. What made it even more devastating was seeing the dates alongside my own memories of that period. The $12,000 charge to Scottsdale Grand Resort was made on the same day I had called Melissa crying about my car being repossessed. The $3,500 charge to Enchanted Gardens was made 3 days after I'd been to the emergency room for a panic attack brought on by financial stress. Your Honor, I said, my voice stronger now that the shock was giving way to anger. These charges were made by my sister for her wedding. I didn't authorize them, and I didn't know about them until this moment. Judge Martinez leaned back in her chair, clearly annoyed by this complication. Ms. Rodriguez, this significantly changes the nature of your case. If these charges are truly fraudulent, you'll need to file police reports and work with the credit card companies to dispute them before we can proceed with bankruptcy proceedings. What does that mean for my case? I asked. It means I'm continuing this hearing for 2 weeks to allow you time to investigate these charges thoroughly. If $47,000 of your debt is fraudulent, your actual debt load may not require bankruptcy protection. However, if you choose not to pursue fraud charges against your sister, then you'll be responsible for the entire amount. The implications hit me like a physical blow. I could save myself from bankruptcy, but only by sending my sister to prison for felony fraud. Or I could protect Melissa and accept financial ruin for crimes I didn't commit. As we left the courtroom, Mr. Davidson walked beside me in silence until we reached the parking garage. Jessica, I need to ask you directly. Did you give your sister permission to use your credit cards for her wedding? No, I said firmly. I had no idea any of this was happening. I was struggling to pay for groceries while she was charging thousands of dollars to my accounts. Then you need to understand something very clearly, he said, stopping beside his car. What your sister did isn't a family dispute or a misunderstanding. It's identity theft and fraud, both felony charges in Arizona. The amounts involved make this a serious criminal matter. What if I just accept the debt and continue with bankruptcy? I asked desperately. Jessica, $47,000 in fraudulent charges means your sister stole nearly 2 years of your gross income. Even after bankruptcy, the damage to your credit will follow you for years. You'll have trouble renting apartments, getting car loans, maybe even finding certain jobs. Meanwhile, she'll face no consequences for destroying your financial life. Standing in that parking garage, still wearing my one good suit, I realized that my entire relationship with my sister had been built on a lie. While I had been sacrificing my own financial security to help her through various crises over the years, she had been systematically stealing from me to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford. The sister who had listened to me cry about money troubles was the same person who had been secretly charging wedding expenses to my credit cards. The sister who had offered to let me move in with her to save money owned a house she could only afford because she was stealing from me. The sister who had brought me care packages when I couldn't afford groceries had been financing her generosity with my own stolen credit. I had 2 weeks to decide whether to save myself by destroying Melissa or protect her by accepting the consequences of her crimes. As I drove home to my tiny apartment, I realized that either choice would mean the end of our relationship as I had known it. The question was whether I was finally ready to choose myself over the sister who had never chosen me.
I spent the next 3 days in a state of shock, alternating between disbelief and rage as I processed what I had learned at the bankruptcy hearing. The folder of credit card statements sat on my kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene, and every time I looked at it, I discovered new layers of Melissa's deception. My first step was to request detailed statements for all my credit cards going back 18 months, the full period of Melissa's engagement and wedding planning. What arrived in my email over the next 48 hours was a comprehensive timeline of systematic theft that took my breath away. The deception had started small, almost tentatively. The first charge was $247 to a bridal salon in Scottsdale for what appeared to be a consultation fee. This was made just 2 weeks after Melissa announced her engagement, when she was supposedly in the early stages of budget-conscious planning. The charge was small enough that it wouldn't have stood out among my regular expenses, especially during a period when I was already stressed about my reduced income. Over the following weeks, the charges escalated gradually. $89 for wedding planning software, $156 for a subscription to premium wedding magazines and websites, $312 for what looked like vendor consultation fees. Each charge was carefully sized to avoid suspicion, never more than a few $100s at a time, spread across 3 different credit cards. What made the deception even more sophisticated was how Melissa had coordinated the charges with my own spending patterns. She clearly had access to my statements somehow, because the fraudulent charges were always timed to coincide with periods when I was making legitimate purchases. A $200 florist consultation would appear on the same day I had charged groceries and gas, making it blend into my normal activity. The middle phase of her deception, during months 3 through 6 of the engagement, showed increasing boldness. Charges jumped to the $500 to $1,500 range as major vendor deposits were required. $1,200 to Scottsdale Grand Resort for what must have been the initial venue deposit, $867 to Divine Wedding Photography for their booking fee, $1,445 to a high-end catering company for menu tastings and planning sessions. During this same period, I was falling further behind on my legitimate bills, often making only minimum payments on my credit cards while struggling to cover rent and basic expenses. I had attributed my growing debt to my own financial mismanagement during a difficult time, never imagining that someone else was actively adding to my burden. The final phase, in the 3 months leading up to the wedding, was where Melissa's theft became truly devastating. This was when the largest payments were due, and she had apparently grown comfortable enough with her system to make substantial charges. $4,200 for the photographer's final payment, $6,800 for catering and bar service, $3,500 for flowers and decorations, $2,400 for the wedding dress and alterations. What was most shocking was seeing the dates of these large charges in relation to my own financial crisis timeline. The $6,800 catering charge was made on the exact same day I had been denied for a personal loan to help with my mounting debt. The $3,500 flower charge was made 3 days after my car had been repossessed. Melissa was literally stealing thousands of dollars from me while watching me lose everything. To access my credit card accounts, Melissa had to have obtained detailed personal information that only someone very close to me would know. My social security number, my mother's maiden name, my first pet's name, all the security questions that protected my accounts. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a systematic infiltration of my financial identity by someone I trusted completely. I spent hours reviewing old text messages and emails looking for clues about how she had gathered this information. The evidence was there in plain sight, hidden in seemingly innocent conversations. What was the name of that cat we had when we were kids? Tyler and I were trying to remember, she had texted 6 months earlier. Mom's maiden name is Peterson, right? I'm updating some family documents, she had asked during a phone call. I now remember differently. Even more disturbing was discovering how she had managed the logistics of using my credit cards without me noticing the charges immediately. She had somehow gained access to my online banking accounts and changed the mailing addresses for my statements to a P.O. box in Scottsdale. My paper statements had stopped arriving at my apartment 8 months ago, around the time her charges began, but I had attributed this to postal service problems and hadn't followed up because I was overwhelmed with other financial stress. The online account access explained how she had been able to monitor my spending patterns and time her fraudulent charges appropriately. She knew when I was likely to check my accounts, when I typically made payments, and how much available credit I had at any given time. She had been watching my financial life like a predator, waiting for the right moments to strike.
What made me physically sick was realizing that our sister coffee dates during this period had often been intelligence-gathering missions. When she asked about my job search or my financial stress, she wasn't just being a supportive sister, she was assessing my vulnerability and my likelihood of closely monitoring my credit card activity. "How are you holding up financially?" she had asked during a coffee date in February, just days before making a $2,400 charge for her wedding dress. "Are you keeping close track of your spending?" she had wondered aloud in March, right before charging $1,800 for photography engagement sessions. I found evidence of her deception in the smallest details. Text messages where she claimed to be at work when timestamped data from my credit cards showed her making purchases at wedding vendors. Social media posts about saving money and budget wedding planning posted on the same days she was charging thousands of dollars to my accounts. The paper trail also revealed how she had covered her tracks with the wedding vendors. Many of the charges included notations like payment method change or billing address update, suggesting she had initially used my information to secure services and then modified the arrangements to avoid questions. Some vendors had been told that she was handling payments for a family member who preferred privacy, explaining why the credit cards didn't match her name. Perhaps most damaging was discovering that she had used my excellent credit score as leverage to negotiate better rates and secure premium time slots with vendors. Several email confirmations in her accounts, which I accessed using shared family account information, referenced excellent payment history and preferred customer status that had been earned with my stolen financial identity. By the end of my investigation, I had documented 47 separate fraudulent charges totaling $47,386.73. The charges spanned 11 months and involved 23 different vendors across the wedding industry. It wasn't impulsive or emotional spending. It was a calculated, systematic theft that had required months of planning and execution. The most painful realization was that Melissa had been living a double life throughout her entire engagement. With me, she was the struggling sister who needed support and understanding as she planned a modest wedding. With vendors and Tyler's family, she was the bride with excellent credit and reliable payment history who could afford premium services. She had built her dream wedding on the foundation of my financial ruin, all while maintaining the facade of being my closest confidant and supporter. Every vendor she had impressed, every compliment she had received about her beautiful wedding, every moment of pride and joy from her special day, it had all been purchased with stolen money while she watched me struggle to survive. As I sat in my apartment surrounded by printed statements and documentation, I realized that I wasn't just looking at evidence of credit card fraud. I was looking at evidence of a person I had never really known, despite sharing a lifetime of memories and experiences. The sister I thought I knew, impulsive but loving, irresponsible but ultimately harmless, was actually someone capable of systematically destroying my financial life for her own benefit. Someone who could watch me cry about money troubles while secretly stealing from me. Someone who could offer help and support while actively sabotaging my ability to help myself. I had 48 hours left before I needed to decide whether to file criminal charges against her. I knew I had to confront Melissa before making any decisions about criminal charges, but I also knew that a private conversation would give her the opportunity to manipulate the situation or deny everything. I needed witnesses. I needed the truth to be heard by people who could hold her accountable later. Sunday dinner at Mom's house had been a monthly tradition in our family for years, even after Melissa and I had moved out. Mom still lived in the same modest two-bedroom house in Tempe where we'd grown up, and she took pride in maintaining the ritual of family gatherings around her small dining room table. This Sunday would be different. I called Mom on Friday to confirm dinner plans, keeping my voice as normal as possible despite the storm of emotions brewing inside me. "Will Melissa and Tyler be there?" I asked casually. "Of course," Mom replied. "Melissa's bringing that potato salad you like, and Tyler's excited to tell us about his promotion at work." The irony was nauseating. Tyler was celebrating a promotion while unknowingly living in a marriage built on my stolen credit. Melissa was bringing potato salad purchased with money that was ultimately mine, and I was about to destroy our family's Sunday dinner tradition forever. I spent Saturday preparing my evidence like a prosecutor building a case. I printed detailed credit card statements, highlighted the fraudulent charges in yellow, and organized them chronologically alongside photos from Melissa's wedding that clearly showed the vendors and services I had unknowingly paid for. I wanted documentation that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Sunday afternoon, I arrived at Mom's house 30 minutes early, carrying a folder that felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Mom greeted me with her usual hug and immediately began chattering about Tyler's promotion and how proud she was of both her daughters for finding their paths in life. "Jessica looks tired," she observed, studying my face with maternal concern. "Are you eating enough? You've lost weight." If only she knew that her younger daughter was the reason I'd been surviving on pasta and eggs for months. Melissa and Tyler arrived at exactly 5 p.m., as they always did. Melissa looked radiant, with the glow of a newlywed who was still basking in post-wedding bliss. She hugged me warmly, chattering about the recent weekend trip to Sedona and how marriage was even better than she had expected. Tyler shook my hand with genuine warmth. He was a good man, kind, hardworking, and completely unaware that his wife was a criminal. I felt sorry for him, knowing that what I was about to reveal would destroy his trust and possibly his marriage. "So, tell us about this promotion," Mom said, as we gathered around the dinner table laden with her famous pot roast, mashed potatoes, and Melissa's potato salad. Tyler beamed as he described his new role as senior marketing coordinator, a position that came with a $8,000 salary increase and better benefits. "It's been a goal of mine since I started with the company. Now, Melissa and I can start thinking about buying a house, maybe starting a family in a few years." I watched Melissa smile and squeeze Tyler's hand, playing the role of the supportive wife who was excited about their shared future. The performance was flawless, and if I hadn't known the truth, I would have been genuinely happy for them. "That's wonderful," Mom gushed. "You two are such a good team. And Melissa, you've been so responsible since the wedding. I'm proud of how you've settled down." "Actually," I said, setting down my fork, "there's something we need to discuss about the wedding." The table fell silent. Melissa's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "What about it?" I reached for the folder I'd placed by my chair. "I need to ask you directly, Melissa. Did you use my credit cards to pay for your wedding?" The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Tyler looked confused, glancing between Melissa and me as if he had missed part of the conversation. Mom frowned,
clearly annoyed by what she perceived as an inappropriate dinner topic. "What are you talking about, Jessica?" Melissa laughed, but the sound was forced and hollow. "Why would you even ask that?" I opened the folder and removed the highlighted credit card statements. By yellow highlighted, created a damning timeline. Scottsdale Grand Resort, $12,000. Divine Wedding Photography, $4,200. Enchanted Gardens Florist, $3,500. Every major expense from your wedding, Melissa, charged to my credit cards without my knowledge or permission.
Mom stared at the papers in confusion. There must be some mistake. Melissa wouldn't do something like that. Tyler's family helped us with the wedding, Melissa said quickly, her voice rising in pitch, and we saved money for months. Tell them, Tyler. But Tyler was studying the credit card statements with the analytical mind that made him good at his marketing job. These are dated throughout your engagement, he said slowly, and they match exactly with our vendor payments. He looked up at Melissa, confusion and growing alarm in his eyes. Mel, how is Jessica's name on all these charges? It's a mistake, Melissa insisted, but her voice was shaking now. Maybe identity theft or some kind of billing error. Jessica, why would you accuse me of this? Because you're the only person who had access to my personal information, I said, pulling out more evidence. You asked me for my social security number to help with some family documents. You knew my mother's maiden name, my first pet's name, all the security questions for my accounts. And you somehow changed my mailing addresses so I wouldn't see the statements. Tyler was staring at his wife with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. Melissa, please tell me this isn't true. Of course it's not true, she snapped, but her tears were forming in her eyes. Tyler, you know me better than that. I would never steal from my own sister. Then explain these charges, I said, my voice getting stronger as my anger built. Explain how my credit cards paid for your dress, your flowers, your reception, your photographer. Explain how you've been living in a marriage built on stolen money while I've been losing everything. Mom had been silent throughout this exchange, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and growing concern. Melissa, she said quietly, just tell us the truth. What happened? That's when Melissa's composure finally cracked completely. The tears that had been threatening began flowing freely, and her voice became a high-pitched wail of self-pity. I didn't mean for it to get so bad. It started with just one small charge, and then everything spiraled. The wedding got so expensive, and Tyler's family wasn't helping as much as I'd hoped, and I didn't know what else to do. Tyler pushed back from the table so hard his chair scraped loudly against the floor. You stole from your sister to pay for our wedding? I was going to pay it back, she cried. Once we were married and stable, I was going to figure out a way to make it right. Jessica has always been so good with money, I thought she could handle it temporarily. The audacity of that statement took my breath away. Handle it? Melissa, I've lost my car. I'm facing eviction. I had to file for bankruptcy because of debt I didn't even create. How exactly was I supposed to handle $47,000 in fraudulent charges? You never told me things were that bad. I told you everything, I shouted, my composure finally breaking. I cried to you about my financial problems for months. You brought me care packages because you knew I couldn't afford groceries. And the whole time, you were the one stealing from me. Tyler stood up from the table, his face a mask of disgust and betrayal. I can't believe this. Our entire wedding was based on a lie. Everything beautiful about that day, it was all stolen. Tyler, please, Melissa reached for him, but he stepped away from her touch. No, Melissa, this isn't just about money. You watched your sister suffer while you were the one causing her suffering. And you let me participate in this without knowing the truth. You made me an accessory to fraud. Mom had been sitting in stunned silence, but finally found her voice. Melissa, how could you do this to your sister, to your family? But instead of remorse or genuine apology, Melissa's response was to attack me. Jessica always acts like she's so perfect, so responsible, but she's been careless with her money for years. If she had been paying attention to her accounts, she would have noticed the charges. The victim blaming was the final straw. So this is my fault?
I asked incredulously. I'm responsible for not noticing that my own sister was systematically stealing from me? You have insurance for this kind of thing. Credit card companies write off fraudulent charges all the time. It's not like you'll actually lose the money. I realized in that moment that Melissa genuinely didn't understand the scope of what she had done. She saw credit card fraud as a victimless crime, something that would ultimately be absorbed by faceless corporations rather than devastating her sister's financial life. Melissa, I said quietly, I have until tomorrow to decide whether to file criminal charges against you. What you did was identity theft and fraud, both felonies in Arizona. You could go to prison. The word prison seemed to finally break through her self-centered delusions. Her face went white and she looked around the table at her family with genuine fear for the first time. Jessica, please, she whispered. I'm your sister. So was I replied, standing up and gathering my evidence. But that didn't stop you from destroying my life for your perfect wedding.
The Monday morning after the confrontation, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The decision that had seemed impossible just days earlier now felt inevitable. I called Mr. Davidson at 8 a.m. sharp and told him I was ready to file criminal charges against Melissa. I think you're making the right choice, he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many people destroyed by family fraud. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, Jessica. This was a sustained criminal enterprise that lasted nearly a year. By 10 a.m., I was sitting in the Phoenix Police Department's white-collar crime division, speaking with Detective Maria Santos, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in financial fraud cases. She listened to my story with professional detachment, taking notes and asking pointed questions about timeline, evidence, and my relationship with Melissa. Family fraud cases are always difficult, Detective Santos explained as she reviewed my documentation. But this is one of the more systematic cases I've seen. The amount involved, the duration, and the sophistication of the deception all point to premeditated criminal activity. She walked me through the process of filing formal charges. Identity theft in Arizona was a Class 4 felony, punishable by up to 3 years in prison. Fraudulent use of a credit card involving amounts over $25,000 was a Class 3 felony, carrying up to 7 years. With the total amount involved, Melissa was potentially facing a decade in prison. Will she definitely go to jail? I asked, surprised by how conflicted I felt about the answer. That depends on many factors, Detective Santos replied. Her criminal history, her cooperation with the investigation, whether she can make restitution, and what kind of plea agreement the prosecutor's office might offer. First-time offenders sometimes receive probation, especially if they show genuine remorse and take responsibility for their actions. The investigation moved quickly once I filed the report. Detective Santos contacted the credit card companies, obtained detailed transaction records, and began building a case that would be difficult for Melissa to deny. Within 48 hours, she had enough evidence to issue an arrest warrant. Melissa was arrested at her workplace on Wednesday afternoon. The call came from Tyler, his voice hollow and broken. They took her from the boutique in handcuffs, in front of customers and her coworkers. She called me crying from jail, begging me to post bail. I asked, "Are you going to?" The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Tyler spoke. "I don't know who I married, Jessica. The woman I fell in love with wouldn't have stolen from her own sister. I can't even look at our wedding photos without seeing your stolen money in every detail." Melissa's arrest made the local news, though only as a brief mention in the crime blotter. Tempe woman arrested for identity theft and credit card fraud involving $47,000. But in our small family circle, it created shockwaves that reverberated through every relationship. Mom posted Melissa's $15,000 bail by mortgaging her house, a decision that created yet another layer of financial strain on our family. When she called to tell me what she'd done, her voice was heavy with exhaustion and disappointment. "I can't abandon my daughter," she said, though I could hear the doubt in her voice. But Jessica, I need you to know that I don't excuse what she did. I'm horrified by how she treated you. Then why are you helping her? I asked. Because she's still my child, and I can't let her sit in jail, even if she deserves it. But that doesn't mean I approve of her actions or expect you to forgive her. The rift in our family became a chasm when other relatives learned about the situation. My Aunt Rachel, Mom's sister, called me with unconditional support. That girl has been manipulating people her whole life, she said bluntly. I'm proud of you for finally holding her accountable. But Uncle Mike, Dad's brother, who had always favored Melissa, took a different view. Family handles problems privately, he told me during a tense phone conversation. Sending your sister to prison seems extreme for what amounts to borrowing money. Borrowing implies permission, I replied coldly. This was theft, pure and simple. Still, he persisted, she's family. There had to be another way to handle this. These conversations repeated themselves throughout our extended family and friend network. People seemed to fall into two camps: those who understood the severity of identity theft and supported my decision to press charges, and those who viewed it as a family dispute that should have been resolved privately. The most painful reaction came from some of Melissa's friends, who reached out to me with messages that ranged from pleading to accusatory. Her maid of honor, Sarah, sent me a long email describing how devastated Melissa was and how filing charges would ruin her entire future over money that could be paid back eventually.
These messages revealed how effectively Melissa had been controlling the narrative, painting herself as a desperate sister who had made a mistake, rather than a calculating criminal who had systematically stolen from a family member in crisis. Even faced with arrest and potential prison time, she was still manipulating people's perceptions of the situation. Tyler's reaction was perhaps the most tragic aspect of the entire situation. The man who had been planning a future with Melissa now faced the reality that his marriage was built on a foundation of fraud and deception. He moved out of their apartment 3 days after her arrest and retained a divorce attorney by the end of the week. "I keep thinking about our honeymoon," he told me during a coffee meeting where he apologized for unknowingly benefiting from my stolen money. "We went to Hawaii, stayed at this beautiful resort, and the whole time I was so grateful that we'd managed to have such an amazing wedding without going into debt. Now I know it was all fake." He offered to testify on my behalf if the case went to trial, despite the personal cost. "Melissa needs to face consequences for what she did," he said. "If I don't speak up, I'm just enabling her behavior like everyone else has been doing her whole life." The legal process moved forward with bureaucratic efficiency. Melissa was formally arraigned on multiple felony charges and entered a plea of not guilty, despite the overwhelming evidence against her. Her attorney, an expensive criminal defense lawyer that Mom was somehow paying for, began negotiating with the prosecutor's office for a plea deal. Meanwhile, I worked with Mr. Davidson to begin the process of disputing the fraudulent charges with my credit card companies. With the police report and criminal charges filed, the card companies were required to investigate the fraud claims and potentially remove the charges from my account. This process could take several months, Mr. Davidson warned me, and even with the criminal case, some companies might require additional documentation or proof before they agree to write off the debt. The emotional toll of the legal proceedings was exhausting. Every court appearance, every conversation with lawyers, every family member who wanted to discuss the situation, it all served as a constant reminder of Melissa's betrayal. I found myself avoiding social situations, screening phone calls, and generally withdrawing from normal life. 3 weeks after filing charges, I received an unexpected call from Melissa herself. She was crying before I even said hello. "Jessica, please," she sobbed into the phone. "I'll do anything to make this right. I'll get a job, I'll pay you back every penny, I'll do whatever you want. Just please ask them to drop the charges." "It's too late for that," I told her. "You had months to tell me the truth. You chose to let me face bankruptcy instead." "I was scared. I knew you'd be angry, and I thought I could fix it before you found out. I never meant for things to get so bad." "You watched me cry about money troubles while you were stealing from me. You offered to help me with my financial problems while you were the one causing them. How am I supposed to believe that you're sorry now?"
The call ended with Melissa screaming at me through tears, calling me heartless and vindictive for destroying her life over money. Even facing felony charges and the collapse of her marriage, she still couldn't accept responsibility for the consequences of her own actions. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the sister I had grown up with, the person I had protected and supported throughout our lives, had never really existed. She had been a carefully constructed persona designed to manipulate the people around her into providing whatever she needed at any given moment. The real Melissa was someone who could systematically steal from her struggling sister to fund a fantasy wedding, then blame that sister for not preventing the theft. Someone who could watch a family member lose everything while secretly being the cause of that destruction. Understanding this truth was both liberating and devastating. Liberating because it freed me from the guilt I'd been carrying about ruining Melissa's life. Devastating because it meant that I had never really known my own sister at all.
6 months after filing criminal charges against Melissa, the legal proceedings finally reached their conclusion. The case never went to trial. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a decade in prison, Melissa's attorney negotiated a plea agreement with the prosecutor's office. The final hearing took place on a Tuesday morning in October, in the same courthouse where I had discovered the fraud during my bankruptcy proceeding. This time, I sat in the gallery watching as my sister stood before Judge Rodriguez to accept responsibility for her crimes. Melissa pleaded guilty to 1 count of identity theft and 1 count of fraudulent use of a credit card, both felonies. In exchange for her cooperation and guilty plea, she received a sentence of 3 years supervised probation, 500 hours of community service, mandatory financial counseling, and an order to pay full restitution of $47,386.73. Ms. Rodriguez, Judge Rodriguez addressed Melissa directly, what you did to your sister represents a profound betrayal of family trust. Identity theft destroys lives, and the fact that you targeted someone who loved and trusted you makes your crimes particularly reprehensible. Melissa stood silently, wearing a simple black dress that was a far cry from the designer outfits she'd favored during her wedding planning. She had lost weight during the legal proceedings, and the confident, radiant woman I'd known had been replaced by someone who looked hollow and defeated. You will have a felony record for the rest of your life, the judge continued. This will affect your ability to find employment, secure housing, and obtain credit. These are consequences you'll live with long after your probation ends. The restitution order was structured as monthly payments of $500, which meant Melissa would be paying me back for nearly 8 years. Her attorney had argued for smaller payments, claiming she could only afford $200 per month on her retail salary, but the prosecutor had successfully argued that she needed to prioritize repaying the victim over her own comfort. She managed to charge $47,000 in 11 months, the prosecutor had pointed out. She can certainly manage $500 monthly payments to make her victim whole. After the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse feeling a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and closure. Justice had been served, but it felt hollow. No amount of legal consequences could restore the relationship I thought I'd had with my sister, or give me back the year of my life I'd lost to financial crisis and emotional trauma. Tyler was waiting for me in the parking lot. He had testified during the plea negotiations, providing crucial details about the wedding expenses and Melissa's deceptions about their finances. His testimony had helped establish the full scope of her fraud and countered her attorney's attempts to minimize the charges. How do you feel? He asked as we walked toward our cars. Empty, mostly, I admitted. I thought I'd feel vindicated or satisfied, but mostly I just feel sad about how everything turned out. Tyler nodded. I understand. I've been going through the same thing. Part of me still loves the person I thought I married, even though I know now that person never really existed. His divorce from Melissa had been finalized 2 months earlier. She hadn't contested it, perhaps recognizing that their marriage was unsalvageable after the revelations about her fraud. Are you going to be okay financially? I asked him. Eventually, he said. The hardest part is starting over at 28, feeling like I wasted 3 years of my life with someone who was lying to me the entire time. But I'm in therapy, and I'm learning to trust my judgment again. The credit card companies had been surprisingly cooperative once the criminal charges were filed. All 3 companies removed the fraudulent charges from my accounts and provided documentation from my bankruptcy attorney. With the debt eliminated, I was able to withdraw my bankruptcy petition and begin rebuilding my financial life. The process wasn't immediate or easy. My credit score had been severely damaged by months of missed payments and high balances, and it would take years to fully recover. But the relief of knowing that my debt was manageable again gave me hope for the first time in over a year. I found a new full-time position at a different marketing firm, one that paid slightly better than my previous job and offered opportunities for advancement. The stability of steady income allowed me to move to a better apartment and begin saving money again, though I was much more cautious about my financial security than I had been before. My relationship with my mother remained strained but was slowly improving. She had been devastated by Melissa's actions and struggled with guilt about enabling her behavior for years. The financial stress of posting bail and paying for Melissa's attorney had forced her to take on additional debt, creating yet another layer of consequences from her daughter's crimes.
I keep thinking about all the times I made excuses for her. Mom told me during one of our careful conversations, all the times I told you to be more understanding, to help her more. I was enabling a criminal and asking you to be victimized. You couldn't have known, I replied, though part of me was still angry about years of being expected to sacrifice for Melissa's benefit. I should have known, she said firmly. The signs were there. I just chose not to see them because it was easier than dealing with the truth. Mom had insisted that Melissa find her own apartment once the legal proceedings concluded. I love her, but I can't continue to shelter her from the consequences of her actions, she explained. She's 27 years old, and it's time she learned to be truly independent. Melissa found a small studio apartment in a less desirable part of Phoenix and took a full-time job at a department store. Her felony conviction made finding better employment difficult, and she struggled to adjust to a lifestyle that matched her actual income rather than the fantasy she'd been living. We had no direct contact during the months following her sentencing. She made her first restitution payment on time, though she sent it through her attorney rather than directly to me. I heard updates about her life through Mom, who maintained a relationship with her but kept firm boundaries about what help she would provide. She's angry, Mom reported after one of Melissa's visits. She blames you for ruining her life, says you could have handled things privately instead of involving the police. Does she take any responsibility for what she did? I asked. Mom sighed. Some days. Other days she acts like she was the victim of circumstances beyond her control. Her counselor says that's normal for people learning to be accountable for the first time in their lives. The mandatory financial counseling was part of Melissa's probation requirements, and according to Mom, it was forcing her to confront patterns of behavior she'd never acknowledged before. Whether this would lead to genuine change remained to be seen. One unexpected consequence of the entire ordeal was discovering who my real support system was. Friends I'd thought were close disappeared when the situation became complicated and messy, but others stepped up in ways I hadn't expected. Rachel, my friend from college, drove down from Flagstaff to help me move to my new apartment. I should have realized something was wrong when you stopped coming to group dinners, she said. You're usually so responsible with money. If I'd known you were struggling, I would have helped. My coworkers at the new job were supportive when I explained my employment gap and credit issues during the hiring process. Identity theft by a family member is one of the worst kinds, my new boss told me. It takes courage to prosecute someone you love. Even strangers were kinder than I expected. When I had to explain my damaged credit to apartment managers or loan officers, most were understanding once they saw the police reports and court documents. Identity theft was common enough that many people had protocols for dealing with victims. As the one-year anniversary of discovering the fraud approached, I found myself in a place I never could have imagined during those dark months of financial crisis. I had steady employment, manageable debt, and a slowly improving credit score. More importantly, I had learned to trust my own judgment and set boundaries with people who tried to take advantage of my generosity. The relationship with my sister might never recover, but I had discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed and gained clarity about what I would and wouldn't accept from the people in my life. Recovery was possible even after the deepest betrayals.
2 years have passed since I first discovered Melissa's fraud during that devastating bankruptcy hearing, and the person I am today feels fundamentally different from the woman who sat in that courthouse shocked and broken by her sister's betrayal.
The journey from victim to survivor has been longer and more complex than I ever imagined, but it has taught me lessons about family, boundaries, and self-worth that I never could have learned any other way. The most profound realization has been understanding the difference between family loyalty and family enablement. For most of my life, I believed that loving my sister meant protecting her from consequences, helping her out of difficult situations, and making excuses for her irresponsible behavior. I thought that being a good sister meant putting her needs before my own, even when it caused me significant hardship. What I learned through this painful experience is that true love sometimes requires allowing people to face the consequences of their actions. By constantly rescuing Melissa from the results of her choices, my mother and I had actually prevented her from developing the skills and character necessary to function as a responsible adult. Our help had been harmful, and our protection had been destructive. This understanding has changed how I approach all my relationships. I no longer feel obligated to sacrifice my well-being for others, especially when they're capable of solving their own problems. I've learned to offer support without enabling, to express care without taking responsibility for other people's lives. The financial lessons have been equally important. Before the fraud, I had prided myself on my credit score and financial responsibility, but I had been naive about protecting my identity and monitoring my accounts. I now check my credit reports monthly, have fraud alerts on all my accounts, and maintain detailed records of my spending. More significantly, I've learned that financial security isn't just about having money. It's about having systems in place to protect yourself from unexpected disasters. I maintain separate savings accounts at different banks, keep important documents in a safety deposit box, and have learned to be suspicious of anyone who needs access to my personal financial information. My credit score has recovered to 720, not quite back to its original level, but solid enough to qualify for good interest rates and housing options. I was able to buy a small condo last year, a milestone that felt especially meaningful given how close I had come to losing everything. The down payment came partially from Melissa's restitution payments, which have continued steadily for 2 years. She still has 6 years of payments remaining, and while the monthly $500 doesn't significantly impact my lifestyle anymore, it serves as a regular reminder of what happened. Each payment represents both justice served and a relationship that will never be fully repaired. My relationship with Melissa remains complicated and distant. We see each other occasionally at family gatherings where we maintain polite but superficial interactions. She has never offered a genuine apology or taken full responsibility for the harm she caused. According to Mom, her attitude fluctuates between grudging acceptance of consequences and resentment toward me for overreacting to her crimes. She still doesn't really understand what she did wrong, Mom told me after Melissa's most recent visit. She sees it as a financial transaction that went bad, not as a betrayal of trust and family loyalty. This ongoing lack of genuine remorse has made it easier for me to maintain boundaries with Melissa. I'm polite when we interact, but I don't seek out contact or try to rebuild the close relationship we once had. Some family members have criticized this approach, suggesting that I should be more forgiving, but I've learned that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. I can forgive Melissa for her actions without trusting her with access to my life again. I can wish her well without making myself vulnerable to future manipulation or harm. This distinction between forgiveness and foolishness has been crucial to my emotional recovery. My relationship with my mother has actually grown stronger through this experience, though it took time and effort from both of us. Mom had to confront her own role in enabling Melissa's behavior and learn to set boundaries she should have established years earlier. I had to work through my anger about being expected to sacrifice for Melissa throughout our childhood and young adulthood. I failed both of you in different ways, Mom admitted during one of our honest conversations. I failed Melissa by not teaching her accountability,
And I failed you by expecting you to carry responsibilities that weren't yours. These conversations were difficult but necessary. We've built a new relationship based on more realistic expectations and better communication. Mom still maintains contact with Melissa, but she no longer asks me to accommodate or understand her behavior.
The experience has also changed my perspective on success and happiness. Before the fraud, I measured my worth largely through external achievements, my job title, my credit score, my financial stability. While these things are still important to me, I've learned that genuine security comes from knowing yourself well enough to protect your own interests and maintain healthy boundaries. I've also discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed. The woman who sat in that bankruptcy hearing, overwhelmed and defeated, seems like a different person now. I learned that I could navigate complex legal proceedings, rebuild my financial life from scratch, and make difficult decisions about family relationships when necessary. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that surviving betrayal doesn't make you bitter or cynical. It makes you wiser and more selective about who you trust. I'm more careful about sharing personal information, more observant about people's actions versus their words, and more willing to trust my instincts when something feels wrong. In terms of my dating life, the experience initially made me more guarded and suspicious. If my own sister could deceive me so completely, how could I trust romantic partners? But therapy helped me understand that Melissa's behavior said nothing about my worthiness of love or my ability to judge character in other contexts. I've been dating someone wonderful for the past 8 months, a teacher named David who knows my story and respects the boundaries I've learned to set. He understands why I'm careful about financial privacy and doesn't pressure me to move faster than I'm comfortable with. Most importantly, his actions consistently match his words, something I pay attention to much more carefully now. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had discovered the fraud earlier, or if I had been less trusting with my personal information. But I've learned not to dwell on these what-if scenarios. The experience happened, I survived it, and I'm stronger because of it. To anyone facing similar betrayal by family members, I want you to know that protecting yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. Family relationships should be based on mutual respect and genuine care, not on one person's willingness to be victimized by another. You can love someone and still hold them accountable for their actions. The road to recovery after family fraud is long and sometimes lonely, but it's also an opportunity to discover who you really are when you're not defined by other people's expectations or needs. I learned that I'm more resilient than I thought, more capable than I believed, and worthy of relationships based on honesty and respect. If there's one thing I want people to understand from my story, it's that betrayal by family members is particularly devastating because it forces you to question everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you. But surviving that betrayal can also teach you invaluable lessons about your own strength, your own worth, and your own ability to rebuild from nothing. Today, my life is smaller in some ways, but richer in others. I have fewer people in my inner circle, but the relationships I do maintain are based on genuine trust and mutual respect. I'm more cautious with my resources, but I'm also more confident in my ability to protect and provide for myself. The sister I thought I knew is gone, and the family dynamic I grew up with has been permanently changed. But in their place, I've built a life based on reality rather than illusion, and that feels like victory enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.